Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Kuf Beis in Mציעא. As learning for Chanukah basis on the Rav Shapiro. We'll start with the Mishnah at the bottom of Kuf Aleph Beis. Hamasker Bais L'Chaveru. If you rent a house to somebody, you'll see this is why they need lawyers and contracts. So what's the standard case? Unless you wrote otherwise, Hamasker Chayv Delos, the masker must furnish him with a door. Maybe some of the houses didn't have doors. The nagar, a door bolt to lock the door, umano the lock itself. We'll hold over shemasim. Anything that requires a skilled worker, then the landlord has to supply. If it's something which is not necessarily done by a skilled worker, the occupant has to do that. The Bryce and the Gemara will explain more. Hazevel shabal bayis. Let's say there's manure, fertilizer in the chatzer. That belongs to the bayis. The Gemara will discuss this. What is the socher entitled to? The only fertilizer that he can take is hayotzim atam, or anything that comes out of the oven when a crime, or the stovetop bilvad. That stuff is his because presumably he created that by firing up the oven and the stovetop. But a manure found in the field belongs to the landlord. The Gemara will discuss that. Well, whose animals supplied the manure, etc. Tana Rabbana. Again, the Bryce expands more than the Mishnah. If you rent a house, a landlord rents a house to a tenant. The masker is required to put in doors, otherwise animals will come in, robbers, etc. To make windows. Let's say he built a house and it was all stone. There were no windows. He's got to set up some windows there. To strengthen the ceiling. This machlo kora also to support the beams, make sure that the house will stand up. The socher, what is the occupant responsible for? Chayav laso sulam. He should put in a ladder. In other words, if there's a second story and he has to get up there, this was the standard in those days, obviously. The tenant has to supply the ladder, las lamaka, to make a fence around the roof that people shouldn't fall off, las lamarze, to make a gutter so that the rainwater shouldn't damage the building. And also to plaster the roof. That's all the responsibility of the socher. These are all non-skilled worker jobs. Rav Shapiro asked the question, mezuzah on me. Who has to make the mezuzah? Now we're asking over here some mezuzah. We're not looking at who's supposed to write and put the mezuzah. We're talking about the place of the mezuzah. If you ever looked in old places and went to old homes and hundreds of years ago, in the doorpost itself, there's a place for the mezuzah. That's how you could tell old Jewish homes, because there's like an indentation there. So who's responsible there? As mezuzah on me, this mezuzah, Rav Shasha mezuzah chavasador. If you're talking about the mezuzah itself, we're not talking about, as we'll see, I get ahead of myself. We're talking about, if you're talking about the mezuzah itself, that's the responsibility of the occupant, not the person who owns the house. Rav says that's the occupant. Yeah, I got ahead of myself. The question he asks is, who's responsible for the mezuzah? Well, the mezuzah itself, there's no question. The mezuzah itself is the responsibility of the occupant. The question is the makom mezuzah, where you place the mezuzah in there. You have to make a hole or an indentation. You have to carve out a place in the side post. On me, Rav Shapiro said, we learn in the Bryce, we learn in the Mishnah and in the Bryce something which is not the requirement of a skilled worker. The socher has to do that. Hainami here also, even though carving out the doorpost may be the requirement of a skilled worker, the Hainami lav ma'asomen. Why? Because efshu b'gufsa dekanya. You could do it like what we do. You take a reed tube or any other tube and you put the mezuzah in there, which is the way most of us put mezuzahs up today. You don't carve out a spot in the doorpost to fit the mezuzah in. You stick the mezuzah on top. You could even put it in a plastic and scotch tape it to the door also, or put it in a tube of some sort. That doesn't require a skilled worker, and therefore that is also the responsibility of the tenant. If you rent a house to a tenant, the socher has to make the mezuzah. When he leaves, let it be other. He shouldn't take the mezuzah with him. The mezuzah is supposed to remain there. Biyotze. In other words, he shouldn't take it with him and leave. But let's say the landlord or the next the next tenant coming in as a guy, then no tabiyot, you shouldn't leave it for a guy to abuse it. Biyotze, then no tabiyot biyotze. Umaisa was a story bechet shenot biyot. It was a person who took it in his hand. Biyotza, and he went out. Covered ishtov sheva rachmalan. He buried his family. So the Gemara says, Maisa, Lister, I understand. You just said that if you leave and a guy is taking over the residence, either the guy's the owner or the new tenant is a guy, you're supposed to take it off. So what do you mean? Why was this man killed? Rav Sheshis, we're going on the first case, where you leave the house and it belongs to a Jewish person or a Jewish tenant is coming in, you're not supposed to take the mezuzah with you. What's customary is that the new person moves in, the new tenant, the Jewish tenant moves in, puts up his old mezuzahs, then he could take the old mezuzahs off and give it back to the previous occupant, but that he doesn't have to. That's not his, he's not responsible. It's a nice thing to do, but he doesn't have to do that. Hazevel Shabbat Bayis, we said the manure, the fertilizer, let's say, it's called fertilizer, that's found in the chutzner belongs to the landlord. The socher, the only fertilizer he's entitled to is ayosim and atanam and akram. Only the refuse that comes out of his oven and the stovetop, the refuse, the ashes, which turn into, you use that for fertilizer, that's what he's entitled to. But the owner of the house, he's entitled to the fertilizer in the chaser, in the yard. This is more my skin. What do we speak about? Whose refuse was it? Whose fertilizer was it? Either the chaser, if the chaser is also rented out to the chaser, the Torah the socher. In other words, if the occupant, the tenant, not only rented the house but also the courtyard, and it's the oxen, the animals who are producing this fertilizer also belong to the tenant. Why do you say it belongs to Baal Bayis? He's entitled to use the chaser. It's his place. He's got a lease, and he's entitled to it, and it's his animals. Why would you say it belongs to Baal Bayis? We're speaking about the chaser was not rented out to the socher. The tenant only had a deal for the apartment itself, for the house itself, but not for the chaser. But Turi Damaskir. Well, if that's the case, in other words, the owner kept the chaser for himself. He didn't rent out the chaser. And it's the owner's animals, then of course he gets the fertilizer. It's his animals, it's his chaser. It's obvious. The chaser indeed does belong to the maskir. He didn't rent that part out. But other animals who came from elsewhere strayed over here now. In other words, since it's not his animals, the people who let their animals stray, presumably, like you said, they're miyayish on there. They don't care about the fertilizer. Otherwise, they wouldn't have let their animals stray to other people's yards. You know, if you have an animal and he goes and you let him run around, the dog or whatever, and you let him loose and he does his job, in somebody else's field, he leaves his manure there. You don't assume that the owner wants to claim the manure because obviously he let the animal go out. But it's your chutzner and he came into your chutzner. So what are we saying here? Even though it's not the landlord's animals, it's his yard. But since they deposited their manure in his yard, he gets to keep it. Says Gemara, this is a proof to Rav Shapiro. Your chutzner acquires something for you even without your knowledge. You didn't know the animals get in there. You just you had your animals there, and somebody else came in and somebody else let their animals stray into your yard, and they deposited their manure there. You're entitled to keep it because your chutzner is coming to you, even though you didn't know they were there. Now the Gemara is going to ask a bunch of questions on the sheet of Meisvei. Everybody says, if a man says like this, I have a chutzner, anything that falls into my chutzner today, I want my chutzner to acquire for me. Lo amar klum. That doesn't mean anything. Meaning, your chutzner doesn't automatically acquire for you. So how could Yosef say that your chutzner acquires for you automatically even without your knowledge? Even without your knowledge, it acquires for you. So certainly with your knowledge, when you say anything that comes with my chutzner today, I want my chutzner to acquire for me, why shouldn't it acquire? Why do you say his words are meaningless? Now that's speaking of a chutzner which is unguarded. If you have a chutzner which is open to the public, anybody can walk in, so your chutzner doesn't acquire for you automatically. If that's the case, let's say people say, wow, did you hear that Yankel, a diamond flew into his chutzner, something fell into his chutzner And look what happened. Look how he got it. He didn't do anything. Something just went out, and he found it in his chatzer. He found a new car in his chatzer or something. He found something valuable in his chatzer. Varav kayamin. It says Yatzal Hashem Mציעא Be'ir Varav kayamin. In other words, if he said anything that comes to my chatzer today, I want it to be mine. And then something flew into his chatzer, some birds or whatever, something came in his chatzer, his words are fulfilled. If it's an unguarded field, so what if it's known, there was a rumor in the city that something fell into his chutzner and he gets to keep it? Why? If it's an unguarded chutzner, it's not like it doesn't have power of acquisition. And it's just keeping the Yasal Shem Be'ir. Since a rumor went out that Yankel found this item, it fell into his chutzner, people will stay away from it, and because they know that it belongs to him. He had said that anything calls from his chutzner he wants to acquire, and this item just by happenstance came into his chutzner. Maybe it was an animal, maybe it was something, whatever it was, something of value, and rumor had, look, he acquired it. Then it's like a guarded field, because now people will stay away from it since everybody knows that it belongs to him. If somebody else would come and take it, they'll say, hey, you took Yankel's item. Meisvei, still another kasha. So our Mishnah said that the fertilizer that comes out of the oven or the stove belongs to the tenant. So the Bryce adds on, anything that's intercepted from the air, even if it's in the air, belongs to him. But if it's in the barn or the barn or the chatzar, that belongs to the balabayas. Tomorrow we'll ask in a minute why is it sheberef sheba chatzar? If they both belong to the balabayas, the refus and the chatzar, why say both? If he didn't rent those things out, obviously they belong to the balabayas. But the kash is from the first part. He said anything that's intercepted from the air belongs to the tenant. Right? If you hold Rav Chanina, who says what? The Omer Chaser Shalom Kono Shlamidaito, your chatzar requires for you even without your knowledge. Why do you say that the tenant gets to keep not only the refuse, the fertilizer that comes out of the tanur or the karayim, the oven and the stove? Not only that, but even stuff that's intercepted in the airspace of the chatzar. Why? According to Rav Chanina, chatzar of a person requires, and if chatzar person, if it's a chatzar mishtamaris, if it's a garden chatzar, it's acquired automatic. It acquires, the chatzar itself acquires the items that fell into it automatically for the owner who didn't rent out his chatzar. So why do you say that it belongs to the tenant? Here it's speaking about I didn't even reach the airspace of the chutzner. Over here we're speaking about where the animal, let's say, belonged to the tenant, and this cleat, there was a cleat, let's say a pail that was attached to the buttocks of the animal, and when the animal defecated, it came straight into the cleat, never really reached the Avir Chatzar. Rashi says over here, right? So we're saying over here, we're talking about so it's automatic. In other words, it went right into the whose animal, whoever's animal it was, whether it was the tenant's or somebody else's, but the refuse that the manure went straight into the dung from the animal went straight into the kli without reaching the avir. That's one answer, a little bit of a dochik. Rav Amar Avir Shein Sof L'Ruch K'lav K'Machdami. When we say over here that if the kolit ben avir belongs to the tenant, right? Even though if it fell onto the ground, so we agree that it belongs to the owner because it's his chutzner. But if it didn't, if it fell into the airspace, so the first answer, Abai says it didn't even reach the airspace. It went straight from the animal literally into the kli without having any airspace. Rava says no, it's avir shein sof l'ruach. Since it didn't have to be literally you attach the kli to the animal, but since it fell into the kli eventually, it's not going to rest on the ground. It's like dummy, and therefore it's not like it reached the chutzner, and therefore it doesn't belong to the chutzner, belongs to the tenant if it was his animal. Is that obvious to Rava? Is it so obvious to Rava that what that avir shein sof l'ruach is lav k'munach? If it's even if it reached the airspace, but it wasn't eventually going to hit the ground, if something was going to intercept it, then it's not k'munach and it's not like it's on the chutzner. It's not like on the ground of the chutzner and the owner of the chutzner were not a male he acquired from me boy. he had this question. The boy Rava, Zarek Anaki, Pesach Zef, a man, let's say, threw away his wallet. He threw his wallet. He was making it hefker, if Kira, whoever wants to get it, and he threw it through a house, went in the Pesach Zef, went through one door or one window and went out through the other. Mao. What would you say over there? Would the owner of the house acquire it because the person who threw it away was mafkrit? Or do you say, since it's not gonna land in the house, it went through what it was gonna go, you threw it with such force that it went in one door and went out the other, it's not Kamunach Dami. So you see that he's not sure if Avir Shein Safam Nuach is Kamunach Dami or not. Over there, there's nothing to intercept it. If you have two big windows, one on one side of the house, one on the opposite on the other side, and you threw it through one and went right through the other one, it wasn't going to land eventually anyway. Nothing was intercepting it. But over here, there was a kli that was intercepting it. So even though it wasn't attached to the buttocks of the animal, but it was on the ground. So here we're talking about the kol me'aver areyu shalo. He gets to keep it because it never was going to reach the ground. If it would reach the ground, even though apparently it was the animal of the tenant, but once it hits the ground, it belongs to the Baal Chutzer, to the landlord, because he didn't rent out the Chutzer to the tenant, only the house.
Machines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Buckets.
Yeah.
Impossible to.
Okay, but so the owner of the Chutzer would come in and take. He would come in and take the buckets away. Obviously, in other words, if it reached the buckets of the tenant, he's entitled to keep it. It's his bucket. But if it didn't hit the bucket and hit the ground, then it belongs to the It doesn't have to be a bucket. It could be a gigantic receptacle that he put there also. If it belongs to the tenant, it didn't reach the chutzner's ground.
If they shoes, then it belongs to
Yes, if we said that any dung in the barn or in the chutzner belongs to the landlord because he didn't rent those houses, Tarti would have told me both for. If it's in the barn or the chutzner, either one, it belongs to the Baal Chutzer, the landlord. What's the chiddush? Amar Abaya, Hachakamer. This is what he means to say. If it's in the barn, which is in the courtyard, then it belongs to the Baal Chutzer. Hareu shel Baal Abayis. And you see from here, Marvashi, if you rent out your courtyard, stam lo hiskerefes shabbat. Even though he rented out the chutzer, that's the chiddush over here. Shabbat chutzer. Even though he rented out the apartment, the house, and the chutzer, but if there was a barn in the chutzer, that wasn't included automatically unless it was so specified. A lot of these rules are because you didn't put that clearly in the lease. Meisvei, Yonei Shobach, birds. Birds who live in a birdhouse and they travel elsewhere, right? The birds fly away, but the owner knows they usually come back to the birdhouse. The Yonei Aliyah, or the birds that are the pigeons that reside in the upper stories of your house. Chayavas b'shiluach. Shiluch haken means that if it has babies or eggs, you're only allowed to take the eggs or the babies, the young birds, only if you send away the mother first. That's what the pasuk says. It says you have to send away. You can't steal them and shalom. Now those words are going to be a little difficult to understand. You can't steal them, right? You can't steal them, presumably because the owner relies on them. The owner knows he comes back to his birdhouse. They don't really stay there all the time, but they come back. So it's because you can't steal them. Neidar shalom. Neidar shalom sounds like it's not really gezel. It's just it's the right thing to do. But we'll see. The Yommi saw another kasha. Rav had said that chaser shalom konolo. So if chaser shalom konolo shalomidate they acquired from you, so they belong to you already. If they belong to you, they're not chayiv in shiluch haken. Shiluch haken is kari kan. The pasuk says ki kare kan sipur lefenecha. Right? If you happen to come upon it, not that it's in your chutzner. If you have a birdhouse in your house, or you have birds in your house, or you have a cage or something like that, or whatever, or you have some sort of a place where you keep birds, you can't do shiluch hakan there. Shiluch hakan is if you happen to come upon it, that's the mitzvah. excluding if they're there at your disposal. So over here, I understand according to Rav Yosef Chanina, since the chutzner of the person acquires it for him, so how do you say over here chayiv in shiluch haken? There's also thinking they belong to this guy. Amrava, here's the issue. Beitza b'yitzias ruba hu dechayiv b'shluch. As soon as most of the egg is coming out of the mother, the bird, the mother, let's say the chicken or whatever, as soon as most of the egg comes out, chayiv in shiluch at that point. By the way, that's also when the birth of a person is considered born when most of the baby came out. If it's a breech, if it came out by a head first, a normal kind of birth, as soon as the head comes out, the baby's considered born. Nafkamina, as we just had, I had recently, is the baby born on this day, born right near Shkia, or the next day? If the head came out and it took, before Shkia, and then the rest of the body came out after Shkia, it was born before Shkia. So here the same thing, if most of the egg came out, chayiv in shiluch at that point. So here's how we resolve this issue. What was our problem? If the owner owns the eggs, how you chayiv in shiluch hakan? The answer is you chayiv in shiluch hakan as soon as most of the egg came out. He doesn't acquire it until it fell in. So at that point, if most of the egg came out, you're chayiv in shiluch hakan. You're chayiv in shiluch hakan if you come upon it. But the owner doesn't. Isn't it the owner's? No, it's not the owner's yet because it doesn't. It's not his chutz until it fell into the chutz. It's not his. When we say before it fell into the chutzner, if you come upon this mother bird, and it's got eggs coming out of it, as soon as it came out mostly, if you took it at that point, you're chayiv in. You have to send away the mother and then take the egg. Obviously, you'd have to separate them, right, in order for take the egg and send away the mother first. The so what's wrong? Why is it called gezel? Why are you chayiv for gezel? It doesn't belong to the owner yet. The eggs don't belong to the owner because they didn't fall into the nest yet. The answer is it's going on the mother. You can't steal the mother. Now, why are you chayiv on the mother for gezel? Because the owner assumes it's his. Because since the bird, you don't really own it, but since the bird always comes back here, he assumes it's his. Really, the chayiv gezel is for the beitzim. But since most of the egg came out already, the owner considers it his, and therefore, right, you're chayiv for gezel again, shalom, because the owner considers it his, but it's not really his yet, and therefore you are chayiv in shiluch haken. Why do you say I saw it. Rav said also Liskas Basim calls man shame Robet Saleim. Here's what Rav said another halacha, that you can't take the eggs as long as the mother's on them. You can't you can't acquire them as long as the mother's on them. Shenemar Shalech Teshalach Es Ha'aim V'Hadar Bes Sabaram Tikov. Meaning you're not allowed to even acquire the eggs until you send away the mother. So as long as the mother is resting, brooding on the eggs, you're not allowed to acquire them. So you could even say that the owner of the shobach, the owner of the nest or whatever, the owner of the place where the animal, where the birds are resting, he can't acquire it as soon as it hits his territory because you're not allowed to take it until you send away the mother. Really, the eggs already fell in. The eggs are in his chatzer, in his shobach, in his birdhouse, which is in his chatzer, let's say. But since he can't acquire them yet, right? Since he can't acquire them, because Rav said you're not allowed to acquire the eggs until you send away the mother. So when the owner can acquire them, his chatzer can also acquire. Since he can't acquire the eggs, it's also for him to acquire the eggs yet. If he can't acquire the eggs, that means Rabbi Yosef is correct that your chatzer, if you have a guarded chatzer and you want your chatzer to acquire things for you, even though you don't know that they fell in there, that they have to come in there, they acquire for you. You have a chutzner that's guarded, but still animals got their way in there and they left refuse there, then it's yours. Or they left anything there. They left toys, balls, whatever they left in there really belongs to you. But over here in this case, since Rav says you're not allowed to acquire the eggs until you send away the mother, so even if the eggs fell into your chutzner, into your nest, into your birdhouse, you don't acquire them. So therefore, until you send away the mother. Therefore, number one, you're required to do shiluch haken, but because they're not considered yours yet. So you're chayiv for shiluch haken. So the other question is, why do you say that you can't steal them because of darka shalom? I don't understand the case. If the owner sent away the mother already, so he owns the eggs. So guess you. It says over here, okay, if the owner, the eggs fell into his nest, let's say his nest in his shabach, and he sent away the mother, then they belong to him. It's not gesem dakashalom, it's mamish, it's gesem, you stole them. And if he didn't send them away, why are you saying that you're chayiv in geza, you can't take him? Just the opposite, you're supposed to send away the mother. You're supposed to send away the mother. What are you talking about stealing? You're supposed to send away the mother. The other thing we're saying, but cotton the lava shluchim. What happened was the one who found him over here is a cotton who's not capable of sending him away. So he's not responsible. He's not bar mitzvah. So he's not chayiv in the mitzvah of shiluach. So cotton bar darka shalom. So what he's saying, he shouldn't take it because of darka shalom. He's not mechuyev to send him away because he's not a bar mitzvah. So why do you say, but you shouldn't steal it because of darka shalom? Is he mechuyev to worry about darka shalom? The father of the cotton chayiv lahachshalom ne darka shalom. Here's the point: the child found him. He's not chayiv in shiluch hakan. He's not chayiv in shiluch hakan, right? And but what he should do is, if he takes the eggs or the mother for that reason, he should return it. The father should return it to the original owner, to the owner of the shobach, because of darka shalom. A little bit of a doche. Says the Mishnah 2 lines from the bottom of the page. The shana. This is why we have leases today, which are very specific. You rented out your house for the entire year, let's say for the entire calendar year 2024, for a year, and then it's 2024. It's not good because they usually know in those days they didn't know if they're going to be ma'abed the year or not. Here we have Tufshin Pei Daled. Let's say you rented out for the Hebrew year, Tufshin Pei Daled, and you didn't know in advance that they were going to add an extra month. Today we have a calendar, we know, right? If a year became mu'uber, he added an extra month because it was an Ibr year. The Sabra L'Socher, the Socher gets the extra month because he rented it for Tufshin Pei Daled. I rented it for the whole Tufshin Pei Daled. Tufshin Pei Daled includes 13 months. This year we had an Ibr year. Let's say you rent it out by the month. Then it's Sabra Shon, it's Sabra L'Masker. He says, I'm renting it to you for $100 a month. Okay, if there's 2 adars, you pay for 2 adars, going by the month. Very simple. Maisavit's brother's story in the city of Tzipora in the north of Israel. A man rented a bathhouse from somebody else, and the tenant, the renter, what was the deal? It says b'shnei masar zav l'shana, 12, let's say $1,200, 12 golden dollars for the year. Midin zav l'chodesh. So it said both things. It said $12 or $1,200 for the year, and then it said $100 a month. It said both languages in there. The story, this question came before Rav Shimon. Obviously, the tenant said, I pay for the whole year, $1,200. And the landlord said, no, it's $100 a month. I'm entitled to $1,300. But when they said, you split the extra month. What do you pay at the end? $1,250 for the whole year. You split the month. Okay. So it's more Maisa Lister. Understand. You bring in a story now that contradicts what you said. You said that if you said by the year, then the tenant gets the advantage, pays $12 for the year. If you say by the month, pays 13, now you're bringing a story that says that no, you split it. What's going on over here? Missing the Mishnah. So the story, the way we said it over here, the way we have it in our Mishnah, sounds like that's not really missing from the Mishnah, because it says so it mentions over there, it sounds like he did specify both things, and so it's not such a kasha. But he said anyway. The Bryce explains it better, or the story, the Gemara explains it better when he said it's $1,200 for the year. In that case, yachloku. In other words, that the Gemara, that the Mishnah effectively is saying that the kasha was because he didn't say achlok in the Mishnah. He said either he pays $1,200 or pays $1,300, depending if it was by the year, by the month. And then you tell me a story that they split it. How was that? The answer is, since he mentioned both in the lease, he mentioned both $1,200 and $100 a month. So there was a question came up, you split it. But my sanami, there was a story confirming that Allah in the city of Sipor, a man rented a bathhouse from somebody else, $1,200 for the year. You did us of the chodesh, $100 a month. They split it. He split the extra month. Amarav. So that's the story. Rav Shimon Gamliel and Rav Yossi Paskin, you split the extra month. We're going to talk about that now. Amarav, yeah, like I said, had I been there, I've been in LA, Kule, Lamasker. I would have said no. The masker gets the whole extra month. In other words, $1,300. Why? Why? Because what was the last thing that he said? He said $1,200 a year, $100 per month. That was the last thing he said. So why we're assuming now that the reason is you go with the last thing that he said. It's $1,200 a year, but remember it's $100 a month. My Kamash was that according to Rav, you take precedence. You grab the last lashon that he said. Rav already said this. So he already said this once. Why? The Amar Afuna Amar Rav. They said the yeshiva of Rav is following. If a man bought something from somebody else and he specified how much, the seller said, how much am I getting for this? Is stira. A stira is a coin. Now, a regular stira, Rashi explains the whole business, that it's like a half a dinner. And how much is that? Really 96 prutas. But he says, is stira mea ma'i. Now, the ma'i that we're talking about, it's not the silver maw that we talk about normally. It's the nechoshet, it's the copper maw, which is the equivalent of a pruta. So when it says over here, ma'i, we really mean, like Rashi says, stam mos prutas nenu. So we're talking about a pruta, a copper coin, just like a small penny. So he says in a stira, but then he says instead of 96 prutas, he says it's 100 prutas. Okay, he says a stira me'amoy. So how much does he have to give? 96 prutas, which is normally in a stira, or 100 me'amoy. No, you go by the 100. Last thing he said was what? 100, right? 100 prutas. Let's say he says me'amoy a stira, 100 prutas, or the equivalent of an astira. He says both me'amoy, but the last thing he said is astira. Then he only pays an astira, only pays 96 prutas, right? 96. So what do you see? Rav already said, Rafuna said, the yeshiva of Rav we learned that you go with the last thing that he said. If he said astira me'amoy, you give 100. If he said me'amoy astira, right? Me'amoy astira, you pay only astira 96 prutas. So we already know that Rav says you take the last lashon. So why does Rav tell me? Had I been there, I would have said that the masker gets 1,300 because he said, look at the last thing that he said, which was $100 a month. Says more no, email some abiyamina pushkam farish. Now, from that case of the astira, it's not clear that he's going with the last thing. He might be saying he's explaining it. He's explaining. What is he explaining? He says, astira me'amoy. Astira, what kind of astira I'm talking about? I'm talking about a good astira that's worth 100 prutos, right? That's worth 100 prutos, meaning not cheap, not bad prutos, but or 100 prutos, let's say, that aren't as good. A normal astira is 96. I want good prutos. Don't give me the rubbed out ones. So I want good ones. Maybe he's explaining what kind of astira do I mean? I mean the best ones, which is really more than 96 to 100 prutos. If he said me'amoy astira, he said 100, which is only an astira, he means lousy ones which are only worth 96. That's what I might think that he meant. He's not teaching me you go with the last lashon. He's explaining what kind of an astira that I want. One that's 100 ma, or 100 prutos. What kind of 100 prutos I'm talking about? That equivalent of astira, meaning that altogether they are that the 100 prutas that I'm talking about is astira, which are not such good ones, which compromise an astira, which is 96 good ones, 100 prutos or 96 good ones. I'm just explaining myself. That's what I might think. Kamashwan, we don't say that. So that's why. So Rav is teaching us to use the last lashon. So Rav says you go by the last thing. Rav says since the last thing he said was $100 a month, you go with that, and he has to pay a total of $1,300 for the Ibriyar. Shmuel Amar. Shmuel says no. You know why it's Yachloku over here? It's not Yachloku because you take the first lashon or the second lashon. I'm not sure which one you go with, the first one or the second one. Shmuel's saying, but Bab Emsa Chodesh, we talk about where the man came middle of the extra month. Let's say the 13th month was Adar, right? You went from Nisan to Adar, and the last Adar, there's an Adar base now, came middle of the month. If he came at the beginning of the month, if at the beginning of the month, the guy says, hey, usually, well, in those days, they paid it at the end of the month. But if he says at the beginning of the month, the owner says, look, you only gave me 12 checks, you need a 13th check. We have an Adar base this year. If he came at the beginning of the month, and the master could demand, says, listen, it's an extra month, you got to pay me another month. If he came at the end of the month, and he says, where's the extra money? He says, no, Kulol Suffer, I'm here already. I've lived the extra month. I went by the year, right? So Gemara says, Okay, so there's Shmuel saying, I'm not sure if it's go by the first month, by the beginning or the end. So therefore, if you came in the middle of the month, you split it. If you came at the beginning of the month, Moscow, you'd say, hey, if you want to stay an extra month, you got to pay. If you only came at the end of the month, he says, well, listen, so I can say, I've already lived that extra month. I went by the year. I'm not paying. Came in the middle of the month. Says does Shmuel not agree with Rav that you go by the last lashon? They both say the following. Let's say I'm selling you a large amount, a kur, for $30. A kur is 30 saw. A kur is 30 saw. And he says, I'm selling you a kur for $30. If he hasn't pulled, if he hasn't made a kinyan on all 30, it's one asking. Even if he pulled 29 of them, but he hasn't done the last one, he can go back on the whole deal. Go back on the whole deal because he hasn't made Mashiach yet. Either one can go back. Kur b'shloshim, but if he says, I'm selling you the 30 saw for $30, saw b'sela, and then he specifies each saw for one sela, for $1, let's say, he's counting each one individually. So you see over there he goes. You go by the last lashon. He didn't say kur b'shloshim. If he just said kur b'shloshim, then it's not a deal until he pulls all 30. If he said sell b'sela, each one is an individual deal. So you see, you go with the last lashon. It's no husam time in my mission the toughest. There it's different. Why? Because he already took it. Since he said saw b'sela and he took it already, he acquired it. Hachanami ketafas over here also. Shmuel is saying that if he already lived that extra month, if the tenant stayed in the dira, in the apartment for that extra month, it's like his now. In other words, he's already lived there and the money's in his pocket, so it's like he grabbed it already. Rashi says over here, Shmuel's not sure. And here also, it's like he already, look, I lived already. I didn't. The money's in my pocket. I'm not giving it. That's Shmuel's answer. So why over here is it Yachloku? Why is it Yachloku? So Rabbi Yossi, Rav Shimon Gamliel, and Rabbi Yossi said you split it because it's not sure which way you go. Right? We're not sure if you go by the words $1,200 for the year or $100 per month. Rav says no. You always take the last lashon. $100 per month. The masker gets it. Shmuel apparently goes like Shimon and Rabbi Yossi that you split it. Why? But why do you split it? Not in all cases. Only if you came middle of the month. But if you came at the beginning of the month, then the masker could say, "Listen, it's my house. You rented it for 12 months, not for a year. If you want an extra month, you pay. If you came at the end of the month, then the sofer has the upper hand." That's how Shmuel learns. Not like Shimon and Rabbi Yossi who said, "Mashma, you split it in all cases." Rav Nachman Amar, Karka b'cheskes balek hames. The karka is in the presumption of the owner of the balabayas, and therefore when he says it's always ba'afil above, even if it comes at the end of the month, the master gets it. Shasafik lo achshav no el metchilas. Shasafik came at the beginning of it. So according to Rav Nachman agrees with Rav that the masker would get the whole 1,300, not like Shimon Gamliel and Rabbi Yossi, and not exactly like Shmuel, but Shmuel would agree that if he came at the beginning of the month, then the owner would get the whole amount. Rav Nachman says even if he came at the end of the month, the question came up at the beginning of the month. At the beginning of the month, the 13th month, the question arose, does he have to pay for an extra month or not? Well, at that point, you go with the chazaka. The chazaka is he belongs to the Balabayas. He can demand the extra month. My Kamash Malon, what is he teaching there? Tfos Lashon Achron, that you go by the last Lashon, because since he said 1,200 per year, 100 per month, isn't that the same as Rav, Hainu the Rav? He says, no, he's not saying Tfos Lashon Achron. Even though he would have said $100 per month, 1,200 for the year. So the last Lashon that he said would have been in the favor of the socher, 1,200 per year. Still, Rav Nachman says he gets the masker is entitled to it because the question came up in the last month. At the beginning of the month, the question came up. So we have different shittas over here. Shimon Gamliel Rabbi Yossi say you split it in all cases. The question we don't know. The first month does it go. The 1,200 per year is in the favor of the socher. 100 shekels, $100 per month is in favor of the masker, and you split it. Rav says no. You always go to the second lashon, period, whatever that lashon is. Shmuel is not sure. So Shmuel says at the beginning of the month, you go with the masker, at the end of the month, you go with the socher. And the question here, where you split it, where they split it was only if you come in the middle of the month. There, he's explaining Shimon Gamliel Rabbi Yossi, he's split only in the middle of the month. Rav disagreed with them. And Rav Nachman agreed with Rav that you go, that it's in the favor of the masker, but only because he says that no matter which lashon it was, whether lashon was first or last, you go with the chazaka, and the chazaka is that it belonged to the balabayas. Boy, my name of this question. Socher, let's say the socher says, I paid. Question came up. Let's say a certain month came up, and last month, whatever it was, and it wasn't a question of 12 months or 13 months. The simple question is, did you pay the rent? They didn't have checks. They didn't have bank wires in those days. It was all hand to hand, right? Cash. So the socher says, I paid. I didn't get paid. Who do you believe? Ami love right. Who has to bring proof? So you must say, Amos, when did it come up? If the month hasn't been completed, in those days you paid at the end of the month. Tanina, if then we've already had a brisa teaching me, we've learned already what the law is if it's in the middle of the month. If it's after Shmano, also Tanina, Ditzanan. Mesa, question comes up like this. When are you poda your firstborn son? 30 days, right? Pidyon ben is 30 days. You're not mechuyev till 30 days. Okay. Let's say a boy grew up, he's bar mitzvah now. His father had died when he was a baby. Now the question was, did the father do pidyon ben or not? He doesn't know. If your father didn't do pidyon ben for you and you're the firstborn, you're mechuyev to be part of yourself. You have to go to the phone yourself and do it. These questions come up later on in life, right? Somebody non-religious or the guy who didn't have a coin or whatever it was, he has to be part himself. So, the question is, let's say the father died b'toch shloshim yom. If the father died before the child was 30 days old, the cheskes shlo nifta, you can assume he wasn't podim yet. He could be podim before 30 days, but it's not mechuyev until 30 days. Our minhag is to do it at 30 days. If he was podim before, he could, but he wasn't. He's not mechuyev. It's not like you do a bris early. You know, if you do a bris before the 8th day, it's not a bris, right? Do a bris afterwards. You didn't do a bisman, but it's still a bris. Sometimes you can't do a bisman for whatever reason, right? Many reasons. But if he was poted before, but if you don't know, and it was the father died before 30 days, the assumption is he wasn't poted. If the father died 35 days after the kid was born, you can assume he was poted until they say, no, we know he wasn't poted. So what do you see? It depends on was it bisman or not. Same thing we want to apply over here. If the tenant says I paid, and it's already after the time, after the month is over, you assume he paid. If it was before the time was over, you assume he didn't pay. So Yom the Mashlim in there. Talking about on the very day, it was the 30th day of the month. It's a 30-day month or a 29-day month, and it was the last day of the month. And now the question: does a person normally pay on the day that the tenancy was over, the month was over? And the question over here is like Rashi says. He says, I paid you in the morning. And the other guy says, no, I didn't get paid yet. Although that's the question. Rav Yochanan said, Tanisa, we learned in a brisa, Sachir, a worker, Bismano Nishba Benoto, a worker on payday, the last day, and you're supposed to pay him on his last day of work, or last day at the end of the week, or the end of the month, whatever it was, or a day worker on the end of the day. He has to swear. Normally, who swears? We learned the other day, who swears? The person who doesn't have to pay. If the owner says, I paid you, right? The boss says, I paid you, and the worker says, you didn't pay me. Normally, who would have to swear? The owner, the boss would have to swear because he's the one you swear always not to pay, right? The Balav swears below Yishalim, as we had the other day in the Gemara. Rashi brought it down on Kuf Hamid Beis that the one who has to swear is the one who doesn't pay. But over here, the rabbi said no. The boss has many workers; he doesn't know which one he paid. The socher, the sachir, the worker, he knows if he was paid or not. So the rabbis put the shvu on him. Sachir, who the Rama Rabbanan shvu. When it comes to the sachir, even though he's the one collecting, the rabbi said he should make the shvu. Mishum the balabai started before. Balabai is busy with all his workers. He's not as clear in his mind who he paid, who he didn't pay, if he didn't have a ledger or a receipt. Aval hacha, socher mehemen b'shvua. But over here, the socher is believed with the shvua. Why? Because he's the one who's pottering himself up. Right? He's the one who's saying, even though this is not a shvua the rice of modim mix, it's not a question of modim mixes. Did you pay for the month or didn't you pay for the month? You might have rented it for 1 month or for whatever month it was. You're going to have to pay at the end of the month. So the question, did you pay or not? The socher says, I paid. The owner says, the landlord says, I didn't get paid. Who normally makes a shvua? Right? There's no shvua the rice here because it's a question: did you pay in full or did you not pay in full? You didn't. There's not an argument about it. He paid half. He says, I didn't pay. The socher says, I paid you the whole thing. The owner says, you didn't get paid at all. I didn't get paid at all. Over here, it's only a shvua d'rabbanan, but still the shvua d'rabbanan is like a shvua d'oraisa, that the one who swears is the one who doesn't want to pay. Up here also, the sochers believe the shvua to say, I paid you already. In a case like this, where they didn't have any receipts and it wasn't customary to make receipts, so that's why he would swear that I paid you already. So again, if it's after the time, if the month is over, you could assume the assumption is presumably he has no claim at all. He doesn't even have to swear. If it was before the month was over, and normally you don't pay before the month is over, then the assumption is he didn't pay yet, and he would have to pay again. The question is on the last day of payment, the last day of the month, the socher says, I paid you in the morning. The masker says, I didn't get paid. The socher makes a shvua that he paid, and then he's off the hook. All right, we'll pick it up from here tomorrow, the fourth line, the Daf Kuf Gimel. Shavua Tov L'Kulam.